heart of Florida's energy at floridasenergy.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, how changing immigration policies are making it tougher for employers to comply with the law. We talked to a local economist about how companies can respond to an uncertain labor market. Then, a local nonprofit focuses on helping female veterans tackle the challenge of re-entering the civilian workforce. And a trafficking recovery nonprofit celebrates a milestone. What's on tap for Rethreaded's 14th birthday celebration? Plus, the complex legacy of writer Booker T. Washington is the focus of a stage adaptation of his classic, Up From Slavery. You're welcome to join our conversation today on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. President Trump says the U.S. has reached trade agreements with 3 countries, Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The deals come ahead of Trump's deadline next week. If other nations don't strike independent trade agreements with the U.S., Trump will impose significant new tariffs on them. Economists say the tariffs will prompt manufacturers to pass higher costs onto American consumers. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that's not fully happening.
Who pays the tariffs is a choice, and what we've seen thus far is that the manufacturers are eating a substantial portion of the tariffs and taking it into their profit margins.
He spoke to MSNBC. This week, automakers Stellantis and GM reported sharply lower profits in their latest quarters. Company officials cited the Trump tariffs. Yesterday, the Ukrainian parliament voted in favor of a bill limiting the independence of anti-corruption agencies. NPR's Hanna Palamarenko reports from Kyiv. Thousands turned out in the capital and other Ukrainian cities to protest, demanding Ukraine's president veto the law.
People chanted, "Veto the law," as they gathered in the square closest to the government quarter in Kyiv. 29-year-old Polina Timchenko is among the protesters.
It's a betrayal of everyone who is on the front line, for everyone who is fighting for our liberty, for everyone who is fighting for Ukraine not being Russia.
Despite the protests, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed the law. He later had the meeting with the heads of law enforcement and anti-corruption agencies to start work on a common action plan. The Ukrainian parliament says it will collect votes for a petition to the Constitutional Court to repeal the law. Hanna Palamarenko, NPR News, Kyiv.
In the U.S., officials from the Social Security Administration have shuffled hundreds of local frontline workers to cover the agency's national 800 hotline. This is part of an effort to bring down wait times on the phone. But as NPR's Ashley Lopez reports, agency workers say it's creating more strain in local offices.
A spokesperson for the Social Security Administration says officials have deployed 4% of local staff to cover the 800 number. And they say this effort has already started to bring down wait times for phone services. But workers say it's forced overworked staff to cover employees now on the phone lines. Jessica LaPointe is president of a union chapter that represents these workers. She says the agency's ongoing efforts to shrink the overall workforce was already creating issues.
We were already overburdened, overworked, and burning out, and then a bunch of work just got dumped on us.
LaPointe says efforts to bring down wait times for services cannot be done without hiring more people. Ashley Lopez, NPR News.
You're listening to NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. It's that time of year. Jaguars training camp practices start this morning. Today's open practice at the Miller Electric Center is the first of 12 training camp practices and 3 preseason games ahead of the 2025 season. This is the first training camp as head coach for Liam Cohen, a young coaching staff and front office, as the team will try to put last season's 4-13 record behind them. The regular season starts September 7th at home against the Carolina Panthers. Immigration and human rights groups say at least 6 detainees in the immigrant detention center in the Everglades, known as Alligator Alcatraz, have been hospitalized for various health reasons. Sebastian Caicedo is the Miami-Dade regional director for the civic engagement nonprofit Florida Rising. He says groups like his have received multiple reports from family members of detainees alleging inconsistent access to running water and lacking full meals.
It's just completely unacceptable. So I think we need more people to realize what's happening and say enough is enough.
A spokesperson for the Florida Department of Emergency Management, which operates the detention facility, denied the claims about the scant conditions at the facility. Environmental groups and others have filed multiple lawsuits which are pending to try and shut down the detention center. A much cooler day here in Jacksonville in northeast Florida. Highs expected to reach the upper 80s to lower 90s. Widespread showers expected to pick up this afternoon with downpours near the Jacksonville metro area and inland southeast Georgia.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One with the Capital One Saver Card. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, the economic impact of changing immigration policies. We talked to a local scholar analyzing the business impacts of the Trump administration's crackdown on undocumented workers and foreign-born students. Later in the program, we talked to a local nonprofit tackling the challenges female veterans face as they transition from military careers to the civilian workforce. But first, the nation's immigration policies seem to change almost daily, making it tougher for employers to comply with the law. Here to discuss how companies are responding in an uncertain time is Madeline Zavodny. She's a professor of economics at the University of North Florida, as well as a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics and an adjunct scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Zavodny, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So your research focuses on economic issues related to immigration, and you've written a few books on it. You've studied it for many years. How surprising to you is the pace of change that you're seeing now?
It's very hard to keep up as an academic, and I'm sure it's even harder for immigrants, their families, and employers to understand what's going on. The pace of change really feels unprecedented.
You have appeared on Marketplace Morning Report, which airs on our morning show, Morning Edition, a number of times. Most recently, you were talking about E-Verify, which is something that employers use to vet potential employees. And the use of that has gotten more complicated now for employers who are trying to make sure that the people that they hire have the proper documentation. Can you kind of explain why that's getting more complicated?
Sure. So E-Verify is a website run by the Department of Homeland Security that most employers in Florida and in several other states are required to run new hires through. So when you get a job, you're supposed to present documents that indicate that you are eligible to be employed legally in the United States. So in Florida and some of these other states, what the employer does is they enter that information into this website called E-Verify. And then they get a notification that kicks back if you're approved or not. And if you're not, presumably it's because you are an unauthorized immigrant who's not supposed to be working. And then you're supposed to either correct the record or the employer can't retain you as an employee. The challenge that's going on right now is that large numbers of unauthorized immigrants are losing their work permits. Now, one important question is, if they're unauthorized immigrants, how do they have work permits? And this is really a relic of the Biden administration. that in an attempt to reduce the number of people crossing the border illegally, the Biden administration was allowing large numbers of people to enter legally through ports of entry. They didn't get a visa, but they were able to get a work permit and what's called humanitarian parole. Then, in addition, there are numbers of immigrants who have filed an amnesty application, and they're allowed after 6 months to work while that amnesty application is in progress. So basically, we have this large, millions of unauthorized immigrants who have been allowed to work. And the Trump administration now is beginning to remove that temporary protected status from these immigrants and beginning to deport them and revoking that work permit.
So these are people who are essentially have been hired, had permission to be here, at least temporarily, a temporary protective status, who have that status revoked, and then suddenly they're no longer legal to be employed.
Absolutely. They're no longer legal to be employed. They're no longer legal to be in the United States. And so there's this expectation that they will self-deport on the part of the Trump administration.
But that for an employer who has gone in and they may have hundreds of employees or they may have just a few, but they went in when they hired this person, they checked, they confirmed that they were legal to be hired and be in this country and hired them. And so what are they expected to do now? Are they expected to go back through all of their employee roles and double check everybody to make sure that they're still legal? How are companies handling this?
So what the Department of Homeland Security has told the employers to do is to go back into the E-Verify portal and see if those employees' work permits have been revoked. And if so, then they're supposed to dismiss those employees.
It seems like it could be enormously costly or time consuming.
It is time consuming. And for Florida, this is a very big deal because there was this program called CHNV. And so this stood for Cuban, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. That was over 530,000 immigrants admitted through this humanitarian parole process with work permits. And think about where, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela are. Most of those immigrants, maybe as many as 80% of them, ended up in Florida. And again, they were allowed to work legally, basically as soon as they entered into the United States. Now, they had a sponsor, who was usually a family member here. They were vetted and so on, but they no longer are legally present in the United States. They're expected to leave. Employers are not allowed to keep them. And again, the E-Verify is one of the ways in which the Department of Homeland Security is trying to change what's the kind of status and work whether these people have a job.
So there has been obviously a lot of support, at least there was, initially in the administration for these, mass deportations, for these stricter immigration policies. They've had an impact. We've seen, immigration at the southern border, revert to kind of almost nil. And so, it's had this impact. There's some indication, some polling that suggests, perceptions, attitudes might be changing a little bit about the, intensity of that enforcement and how it actually looks. But you've been looking at, these issues for a long time in terms of how they impact the economy. And there's a lot of people that believe that, once these, especially people who are not legal to the country, who came here without documentation, once they're gone, that all of these jobs are going to open up and there's going to be this boom to the economy. And your research has shown that's not the case. Can you kind of explain what the factors are that figure into why it could actually be hurtful or harmful to the economy?
Sure. So your typical unauthorized immigrant who works has a very different job than the average legal immigrant in the United States, and particularly than the average U.S. native. In particular, they're in very low-skilled jobs that don't require a lot of formal education, and that often these jobs are sort of temporary, transitory. Maybe they're day labor hanging out at the Home Depot. They're working as construction laborers. They're working in the back of the restaurant. They're working as maids and cleaning staff in hotels and so on. These are very arduous, difficult, low-paying jobs, and they're typically not held by a lot of people who have legal papers. In particular, they're not held by U.S. natives. So they're not competing with the vast majority of Americans for jobs. And indeed, their labor helps some Americans either sort of move up the food chain, if you will, the job market ladder, into supervisory jobs or jobs that are higher paid, require more education, more skills, But also these immigrants, they buy things. In some cases, they create their own companies. They provide a lot of assistance to private households, either working as nannies, as lawn care, and so on, and that are allowing a lot of people to have a higher standard of living and to work more than they otherwise would be able to. So there's a lot of effects throughout the labor market and the economy that are somewhat surprising to people.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to UNF economics professor Madeline Zavodny about how employers are impacted by some whipsawing immigration policies. You can join our conversation by giving us a call at 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And obviously, tax revenue is another whole area of economic impact. The taxes that are typically paid by people, whether they have or do not have legal status, they do pay taxes. And so that is a loss. But this is not necessarily just people who are recent arrivals. This is people who've been here for decades. Can you talk about the economic impact of, or is there a difference in economic impact when you take someone who is more established within a community and perhaps has, a family or their own business or whatever versus somebody who's a more recent arrival? Is there a measurable different economic impact?
I think the longer someone has been here, the more integrated they are into the U.S. economic and social fabric, the more likely that they have U.S. born children, and the less likely they are to leave as a result of the changes that are happening in policy. And probably the more costly it's going to be to their employer, as well as to the whole fabric of the society, the community around them, if they do leave. What is somewhat surprising, though, I think, and I have a recent report that called a Dallas Fed Economics blog post at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas that came out that goes through and it tries to estimate the effect of different potential policies under the Trump administration on U.S. GDP growth, so how fast our economy is growing, and on the pace of inflation. And perhaps not surprisingly, that the higher deportations and the smaller inflows of unauthorized immigrants might be, the more negative the impact will be on GDP growth. But what was surprising to us is that the negative impact is really coming from the drying up of inflows. So as you mentioned, Anne, net inflows at the border of unauthorized immigrants are basically around zero. It's been very hard to enter, and there's not a lot of reason to try to enter right now, perhaps because of the political situation going on and the difficulty of getting a job and integrating into the United States. And this net inflow will have economic repercussions, the model that we estimate shows. And they're pretty sizable. What is surprising is that it doesn't have a big impact on inflation. So maybe that's a bit of good news.
But when you say it'll have an impact, how does that manifest for just ordinary folks, for our listeners? Does it hit them in the pocketbook in a way that they can see, or is it more of a trend that they'll feel over a period of years and decades?
It's a trend that you'll experience without necessarily knowing it. So one thing that happened, remember when we were coming out of COVID, right? And things started reopening. So we started going out to eat again, right? And what would happen to my husband was we would go to a restaurant and half the tables would just be closed. They wouldn't be seating people because they didn't have enough staff. And then over sort of the next year or so, the restaurants were able to hire a lot of people because we had this big surge of people coming into the United States, often without visas, and it allowed the businesses to staff up. So I think that this is one thing that's going to happen, is that just some goods and services won't be available, or they might be available at higher prices, perhaps.
I want to talk a little bit about the impact on higher education, which is obviously, kind of the field you work in, but also something that you've studied in terms of how foreign students impact the economy. I saw some research, and I apologize that I can't remember if it's specifically your research, that found that of the U.S. trade surplus last year, this almost $300 billion trade surplus that the U.S. has on services, that about between $50 and $60 billion of that was from foreign students, things that they bring to the economy. They pay for tuition, fees, housing, food, and that translates into hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Yes, the estimates that it's over 300,000 jobs in the United States are supported by international students. So this is mainly university students. And interestingly, they're mostly graduate students. So something that I hear sometimes from my students is, well, when international students are coming, they're taking away slots at universities from U.S. students. And that is usually not the case. Now, it might be at a few very elite universities, but the reality is that at most public institutions in the United States, international students are cross-subsidizing domestic students. That they pay a much higher rate of tuition. They're paying full room and board as well. And this allows the universities to sometimes, indeed, the research by Kevin Shee, who's at the University of California, Riverside, shows to charge lower tuition to public American students at the university level, as well as to offer more courses, more sections of courses, and so on. But again, most of those students are graduate students, and so that's something that most Americans maybe aren't thinking about graduate school. They're hoping to go to college, and so they're not really competing with Americans for slots.
We've got a call from John on the South Side. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm just curious, based on the focus on the economics of immigration, considering the current circumstance and the tremendous amount of pushback against deporting people that are here that are considered being here illegally. Are there examples in other countries, economies, to where a more open border sort of situation where you're not being vetted based on asylum or meeting certain criteria? Is an open border shown to be better for the economy of the entire country? Okay, sorry, that was a little drawn out, but thank you.
Yeah, I think we get it, John.
I don't think there are any countries that have open borders, including the United States. The closest probably is thinking about the European Union, that if you're a European Union citizen, you can go work in other European Union countries, right? And so this was what Brexit took the UK out of that sort of open EU borders situation. And I think it has been tremendously beneficial, particularly to the poorer countries within the EU, like Poland, for example, that their citizens were able to go to higher wage countries, send money back home, and then ultimately maybe came back home with a new set of skills, created new businesses at home.
Overall, though, as the European Union model, was it economically beneficial for the European Union? I mean, there certainly was a lot of pushback, and I think Brexit partially motivated by kind of a reaction to numbers of people coming in and, disrupting somewhat the world that existed there.
So I think economically it's beneficial. Culturally, it's a shock to people. And I think that much of the pushback that we're experiencing to immigration in the United States and in other major immigrant countries like Canada, it gets couched in economic terms, but it's really rooted in cultural factors.
And is that based on the pace? I mean, is it something that over a longer period is less disruptive or perceived as less disruptive, whether it's economic or cultural?
Over generations, it's absolutely not disruptive. I mean, think about.
I guess I mean if the amount of people arriving at a single time is less, if that mitigates some of those assimilation problems.
Absolutely. The smaller managed flows are more easily incorporated. But on the other hand, it's not clear that their economic benefits are bigger.
Okay. I want to just return briefly to the topic of student enrollment because, additionally, I mean, you talked about how this could really impact graduate student programs, but we are seeing a large decline already in, the number of students who are enrolling in these programs. And so I think we can imagine that would impact those schools, but carry that out a little bit further for us. How might it impact schools? What might happen to the schools? And how does it impact the larger economy, if at all?
So what it will mean is probably that some universities will close some graduate programs. And this is particularly bad for undergraduate students who would have had maybe more support from teaching assistants. It's bad for the researchers who would have had the support from the research assistants, and it's bad for Americans who would have wanted to attend those programs alongside American students. Now, the ripple effects in the years to come are, I think, the bigger deal to worry about, which is that some of those international students stay in the United States after graduation, and in particular, they often have degrees in STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And these are the fields that we really, really are going to need. Particularly, we want the people who are trained in AI technologies who can do all of this programming and stuff like that. We're going to want the engineers. And a huge share of them have traditionally been international graduate students who then stay in the U.S. and contribute to our economy. And we're cutting that off.
Just in terms of, your forecast for particularly Florida, what are you going to be looking at? What indicators are you most interested in this next period, whether it's through the end of the year or through the end of this administration?
Well, certainly I'm hoping that we get through hurricane season without anything horrible happening, because I don't know how we would rebuild, because a lot of that very low formal education construction labor force will not be available. That would be very necessary to rebuilding from a hurricane. I'll be keeping an eye on international student numbers throughout the state. And then, we're always interested, of course, in what's happening to the unemployment rate. I would not expect this to lead to a decrease in it at all. And then we might be worried about, what's going on with tax collections and job opportunities.
Are you at all concerned about this merging in some ways of information access when it comes to like the IRS and the Social Security and, immigration generally?
Absolutely. I think we want people to pay their taxes. We also want them to answer government surveys so that we learn about the U.S. population, be they foreign born or American born, legally present or not. And so the less trust people have in the government and the less they cooperate with it, the harder it will be to understand what is going on. Returning to the question about Florida, the other thing I would worry about is that much of Florida's population growth has traditionally come from international migration, be it coming up from Latin America or snowbirds coming down from Canada, and whether that is going to just end and what that's going to do to housing prices.
I do want to take just briefly a call from Ed on the west side. Ed, if you can go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. A question about the temporary permit to stay that have been given to groups now and in the past. It's been going on for decades now. The question I have is, seems like the temporary part never occurs. Has there ever been a group that have been given temporary who actually were, and after a year or two or three or four or five, where they basically apply the temporary part, always end up to stay? I don't blame them. It's sort of like if you have somebody come over to your house because they had a bad situation they're coming from, a disaster, or who knows what, for temporary staying in your house, and the person never leaves. So eventually you're going to be very sensitive to allowing somebody else to come over to your house.
Ed, thank you.
You're right. The Salvadorans got temporary protected status decades ago, and every 18 months it has been renewed. But I think one thing most people don't understand is that there's no viable path for most people who have temporary protected status to get a visa, become a legal permanent resident, and be on a pathway to U.S. citizenship. We just don't have those routes available in the United States for most people. And things in their home countries, unfortunately, in many cases, haven't improved. There have been a couple of countries, even before the Trump administration, where temporary protected status ended. But you're right. For the most part, the temporary part is in name only.
So you're saying there really is no actual mechanism for people with TPS to make a transition to applying for a visa or permanent residency?
No, under a 1996 law, if you entered the U.S. illegally, you have to go back home in order to adjust status. So imagine you've had a kid, right? And when that kid turns 21, they can sponsor you for a green card, in theory. You have to go back home in order to start that process. And as soon as you do that, you're hit with a 10-year reentry bar.
Wow. It's amazing. There are some policies out there that never cease to amaze me that they That's really interesting. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I so appreciate you coming on, Dr. Zavodny. It's a pleasure to meet you. We appreciate your work. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, how a local nonprofit is helping female veterans re-enter the workforce. Welcome back. Jacksonville is home to the second largest population of women veterans in America and the largest in Florida. But focusing on the unique needs of those veterans as they re-enter the civilian workforce is a fairly recent priority. Here to tell us about it is Amanda Conley. She herself is a veteran. She's also a therapist and licensed social worker for the Northeast Florida Women Veterans. Welcome, Amanda.
Hey, thanks, Ann. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Isis Alvarez. She's program director for the Nonprofit Center of Northeast Florida. Good morning, Isis.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you both. So, Amanda Conley, you had to re-enter the workforce after serving. Just personally speaking, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Right. Well, I retired from the Army back in 2007. Thankfully, I was stationed here in Jacksonville, so I retired where I was last stationed, made it a little bit easier, but there were still some challenges with that. 20 years in the Army, I enlisted at 17, so there were a lot of things that I wasn't familiar with. Obviously, we know how the Army works. I had no idea how civilian life worked, right? It's just not something that I ever had to deal with. So learning what to wear to go to work was a huge challenge.
Oh,
I
wow.
had no clothing, right? So we have what we call transition assistance program when you leave the military, and it's a 40-hour course to teach you what we need to know. And it's like drinking from a fire hose. You only get so much of that. So no other resources existed for women veterans at the time. And I don't know as I would have been ready to take advantage of those had they been there, because I still knew everything.
Oh, sure.
The way it works, right? So, but learning what to wear to work. You buy a blue suit, you buy a brown suit, and you buy something to wear to work the first day, because we understand we're going to get the job. But how do you interview? How do you translate those military skills into civilian skills so that an employer can understand that what goes on my resume, what doesn't go on my resume,
right?
And how do we translate those things is always a big challenge. And that's still a challenge, I think, for veterans today, and especially for women veterans.
How about just interpersonal stuff in the workplace, communicating with your coworkers, communicating with your boss, or to people who work for you?
Big challenge, huge challenges, and with that military experience, we're generally taught not to ask too many questions, right? So teaching women that we can ask questions, we can ask those clarifying questions. We don't have to know everything right away. When you achieve a certain rank in the military, you have that experience that goes with that job. That doesn't necessarily translate well to this new environment. And learning how to navigate that is a challenge. A lot of women don't even identify as veterans, right? Because they don't want what I did wasn't important. I really don't want anybody to know. So we just don't do that.
Yeah.
But navigating a new work environment in maybe a situation that's different than what we did in the military, while still dealing with some of those after effects of military service, we all have them. And then maybe still dealing with some of those challenges of now being at home, adjusting to different income levels, still managing those primary caregiver duties that we know, women are always the primary caregiver, whether that's children, partner, parents, whatever those new caregiver responsibilities are. Well, just managing our own mental health issues, physical health issues, some of those things can definitely be a challenge, but
yeah,
it's interesting.
Isis, I want to ask you, this is a military community, as we said, one of the largest in the country. A lot of people serve here, but a lot of people like Amanda return here, and then they stay here. And so that's also just a well-represented population. And I think we think of ourselves as pretty attentive to the needs of veterans. I think a lot of people in this community are aware, if not hyper aware, of kind of the service that they've given, and some of the needs that they might have. But it does seem that even within the nonprofit world, that focusing attention specifically on female veterans is a fairly recent, focus.
Yeah, no, I would say that the beauty about the nonprofit sector is that it's essentially community members that are part of specific groups coming together to solve these big problems that are often not discussed or fully understood by the community at large. And so I would say while there are tons of organizations in Northeast Florida, the entire Northeast Florida, that are working to support veterans in a lot of different ways, whether it be directly with veterans or trying to fix a system that veterans have to exist within, I would say there is still a huge need, as Amanda will share, that to focus on the specific groups within the veteran community that all experience both service and transition to civilian life differently. So I would say that that's where the sector really provides a unique value add to solving these problems. It's because it's the people who have experienced those problems and those lived experiences that are bringing and creating the solutions themselves.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the unique challenges of military veterans, female military veterans who are reentering the workforce and adjusting to civilian life. If you'd like to join our conversation, if you've served or you live with somebody who has, give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Amanda, you were talking a little bit about the various roles that women serve. And some of those are, traditional roles. Some of them are, sort of stereotypes. But, how did those impact a veteran? I mean, all of the challenges of returning to civilian life across the board, whether you're a man or a woman, can be daunting. And there are, we know that there can be there can be injuries, there can be mental health issues. A lot of veterans struggle with homelessness. I wouldn't say a lot. I would say that a lot of people who are homeless maybe have had a service background and because of some injury that they suffered or something they experienced. But do women experience those challenges differently?
We do, absolutely. And in fact, I'm not sure data currently, but I know as of last year, overall homelessness among veterans was decreasing, while homelessness among women veterans was actually increasing. So we do have those additional challenges. The biggest contributor to homelessness among women is divorce, loss of that relationship, and then affordable housing comes with that. But women veterans experience all of those same challenges. But we do experience things differently just because we as women experience things differently, right? We manage emotions differently. We manage pain differently. Women have a much higher pain tolerance than men do, as medical science has shown us. So there are a lot of things that we do handle differently, but very often we also don't know our own worth. It's very common for women to not know how to invest, right? We don't get things like that. So maybe we haven't planned as well for that transition as some of the men have. Or, we didn't get a chance to plan for that transition out of the military because we were too busy focused on taking care of everybody else. So those primary caregiver duties still all come into play. So it's a multifaceted issue. There are a lot of things that we do differently just because we're women.
Got a call from Charles on the west side. Just briefly, Charles, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. For your veteran, I wanted to ask, when I got out in 75, the military occupational specialties had like a civilian equivalent on them. Like I was an interrogator, and my equivalent was translator interpreter. When I got out, I was actually able to get a job translating German documents, but that was very rare. And I wanted to ask you, were the MOS codes when you got out in 2007, were they realistic? Were the civilian specialties that were next to it, the equivalent, was that realistic for you guys? Were you able to get a job in your military field?
Interesting question, Charles. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Charles. Some of those are still pretty realistic. Military police is military police. It is what it is. Same thing with an interrogator. You come in as a translator if that's the language that worked for you. But it's really, really difficult when your MOS while you're in the military is infantry, armor, artillery. Find me a really, really good civilian transition code for that, and it can become a challenge. But yeah, some of them are very realistic. A plumber in the Army can easily be a plumber. And the military is doing much better now, I believe, with certifications. So you can still get those certifications, civilian certifications for those jobs while you're in, if you choose to take advantage of those programs. So a lot of that onus goes back onto the service member as well. So yeah, great question, Charles. Thank you.
Isis, I just want to ask, we only have about 30 seconds left, but obviously this is a difficult time for the nonprofit world, generally speaking. How are they managing, especially, when you're talking about a niche group like military female veterans?
Well, I think the organizations that are serving specific populations are experiencing the same uncertainty that all nonprofits are, right? The funding landscape is changing extremely fast right now. And so organizations such as Northeast Florida Women's Veterans and other organizations are having to really look at what's sustainable long term and how do we continue to be there consistently for the communities that need us. And so I would say for the community at large to really get more involved with those organizations that are in your communities and are serving the populations that you care about, because it's a whole new environment now, and organizations are trying to navigate and find more support amongst the community to make it through.
Right. A lot of need and a lot of reason to help out your local nonprofits. Amanda Conley, Isis Alvarez, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Up next, a trafficking recovery nonprofit celebrates a milestone. What's on tap for Rethreaded's 14th birthday celebration? Welcome back. A local trafficking recovery nonprofit is celebrating an important milestone. Here to tell us about what's on tap for Rethreaded's 14th birthday celebration is Kristen Keene. She's the founder and CEO of Rethreaded. Welcome back, Kristen.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
14 years is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I know, and it's not like a, if you don't actually know why we're celebrating the 14th year, it's not like a significant one, but it's significant because we've been around 14 years and we've officially had 100 women that we've been able to invite into our program to change their lives.
Wow.
So we're celebrating all their accomplishments. We're celebrating and thanking everyone for the past 14 years who has poured into Rethreaded. I mean, that's the reason why we've been so successful, is such an amazing community surrounding us.
Remind us who your clients are, how they get involved, what Rethreaded is about and what it does.
So Rethreaded works with women who've experienced human trafficking, and we provide long-term employment at Rethreaded with wraparound services. So career development, care management, and access to mental health services. And we are long-term, so women stay with us 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you are now marking the milestone of having served 100 women. And what is Rethreaded's measure of success? How do you look at someone who comes in need and know, first of all, when they're ready to move on?
Well, this is the beautiful thing. Women come to us and they have, when you're leaving human trafficking, the success rate for leaving is only 20%, unless a woman gets access to services, and then it gets flipped to 80%. So we work with women to overcome those 75 barriers. So ideally what happens is a woman has choice in her life. Where does she want to work? She has financial freedom. She has broken the generational cycle for herself and her children, and she's eliminated the vulnerabilities that made her vulnerable to trafficking. So, for example, one of our women left. She went to welding school, graduated top of her class. She is now getting safety certified. She has bought land. She has 2 trailers now, and she is living, this life that she's created to live, and is able to navigate it totally differently. And her life, and this is the beautiful thing, right? When one of our women get healed and healthy, and they go out into the world, we all win, right? We all win. They're making our community better. So there is this part that our women go out into the world and they make us better.
It's really extraordinary. And, you talked about, that there are vulnerabilities that women have when they're trying to escape that life and that very, dehumanizing work.
Mhm.
What challenges does the organization face in terms of, either servicing the clients that you have or expanding or communicating what it is that you do?
It's all we cannot meet the demand, right? The demand, usually we have a certain amount of jobs opening every year, and more people applying for those jobs than we're able to face. So that is why the focus of the 14th year is also let's keep building, right? Let's expand so we can help the next 100. We're going to be having a build out soon. Um, and we also want to provide the best care, right? So to grow slowly, so when women do come to Rethreaded, we're providing the best care, with the best leaders, with the best resources, so they have the best chance of reclaiming their life. So that's always the tension, right? Is the need versus the people right in front of you. And how do we balance that and navigate that for the next 14 years of Rethreaded?
And so does the campus provide, in addition to the workplace, the housing, is it all kind of in one? Because you also have a shop that you operate that sells some of the goods that your clients make.
So we don't provide housing. Most of our women are coming. You have to be clean, sober, and stable for about 6 months to come because we're an active workplace. So usually they are coming out of a program that provides step housing. Maybe they're with a family member. Maybe they're with a friend. We're in a housing crisis, so it still tends to be the biggest barrier we have. But on our campus, the idea is when a woman steps on our campus, she will have access to everything she needs to reclaim her life. So we provide the job, the wraparound services, and when she is there for those 8 hours, it is safe. She doesn't have to worry about anything else in her life except I'm here to heal and pave the way for the woman behind me. And we get to watch women do that every single day.
It must be enormously rewarding. And I know, though, it is also an incredibly busy job that you
Yes.
have. And in preparing for this celebration, you're also, kind of getting ready for a big party, right? So tell us a little bit about the elements of this event.
So this is always one of my favorite events of the year, right? So this year, there's always something cool that happens. We're going to have a living museum. So we're going to walk you through the 14 years of how Rethreaded was founded, the mile markers. You're going to be able to walk through the museum and interact with certain parts. There's going to be live debossing. There's going to be people making product. All the food we now have an industrial kitchen. So now all the food is going to be made by our staff, and we always have a special dessert that's featured. And then we started a new program called Project Remade. And this is products that is encouraging the entrepreneurs that Rethreaded in the program. So these are women who make their own product. And for the first time ever, it's their product in our store, and people will be able to purchase product directly from the women in our program. So whatever art product they're making right now is going to be available in our store.
That's excellent. And that's going to be unveiled at the event itself. And so the celebration itself is July 26th. And it's at your headquarters, which is also known as the Dolores Barr Weaver Campus of Hope. She's a big benefactor,
supporter.
obviously, right? But how do you ask people in the community to support it, whether it comes to any of the services that you provide? Is there an opportunity for people to help with things like housing or employment?
Always. The biggest thing to do is come on our campus and take our volunteer experience. Come, you get educated on human trafficking, you get a tour of our campus, you get to deconstruct leather airline seats, and you get to learn about how you can help. That is one of the biggest ways, is just to get educated. And then if your company is interested in being a second chance employer, that's great. If you want to do a t-shirt drive, we're upcycling t-shirts. You can do a t-shirt drive. If you do corporate gifts at your company, you can buy corporate gifts from us. There's almost an overwhelmingly amount of ways that you can get involved with us. We have created it. This is a really hard topic to talk about. So we have created so many easy ways for companies to get involved. And the best thing to do is come to our campus, take the tour, and learn about human trafficking and how you can get involved.
Do you feel like the world of elected officials is knowledgeable enough about this issue? What would you ask of them when it comes to, getting exposure to the work that you do or attending one of those seminars?
We need them, right? This isn't going to change without this is what I always try to say, is that people think this isn't a women's issue, right? The women are going to handle this, but it's an us issue, and it takes it's a systemic problem. So this takes people from all the way from the top down to the on the boots on the ground people to get this. So we always involve. We love to have our elected officials attend. Jacksonville's actually, we're doing a great job coming together and creating systems for women to have a safe way out. I'm actually really proud. I'll come on the show another time and talk about all the great stuff that's happening. But really, if you have been part of Rethreaded in any way, if you have come to One Spark, if you have ever taken a tour, ever volunteered, we want you at our birthday party. We want to celebrate with you. We want to say thank you. We have a $30,000 match from Riverside Homes, a local company who invest in Rethreaded. They're one of our biggest advocates. So everything you purchase, everything you donate is matched up to $30,000. And this is where we're looking towards the future, right? How do we build our capacity for the future? And it's companies like Riverside's Home who make this amazing donation for the 5th year in a row.
Wow, that's extraordinary. And so tickets are free to this event. As we said, it is July 26th. It's from 6 to 8. If people want to get more information to this, go to the Rethreaded site?
Go to, Facebook, our website, Instagram. You can find all the information you need. We'd love, and please RSVP so we know you're coming.
Yeah. Make enough food?
Yes.
All
We have
right.
hundreds of people, so we just want to make sure we have enough.
All right. Well, Kristen Keene of Rethreaded, thank you for the work you do. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
And we'll be back in just a minute.
Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, The Story of Us and You, steps you into a treasure trove of memories, now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org. Don't Miss a Beat presents The Lion King Jr., the conclusion of their 6-week Broadway Experience summer program. Performances will be held at the Ritz Theater July 24th and 26th. Information at don'tmissabeat.org.
If Congress doesn't act, Social Security's trust fund will be drained in 8 years.
So not doing anything is actually aggressively doing something to Social Security. It's eroding it.
The dwindling of the Social Security funds so many Americans rely on, and solutions Congress could take to protect the social safety net. That's next time on Think.
Tonight at 7 on WJCT News 89.9.
In Mexico, oil theft is big business for organized crime syndicates.
It's the second largest revenue source for organized crime after drugs, according to the DEA.
If you buy a tank of gas in Mexico, there's a 1 in 3 chance that gas was handled by a cartel. The black market for oil and more global news next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3 here on WJCT News 89.9.
Medicaid is facing cuts of about $1 trillion. It covers over 60% of nursing home residents, and it's the largest payer of behavioral health services. What do the cuts mean for nursing homes, drug treatment programs, and more? We dig in and take your questions next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. An original news show here in Jacksonville explores the complex legacy of an influential Black leader who rose from slavery to become an educator and a presidential advisor. I'm joined now by Reuben Darrell Hall. He is the executive director and star of Stage Aurora Theater, executive director of Stage Aurora Theater Company, and also star of this new production. Welcome, Reuben.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. So tell us a little bit about this enterprise, kind of why you decided to focus on Booker T. Washington.
The whole thing came about. Okay, what's going on?
Pause to take a quick break. Little throat clearing.
Yes. I was at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater performing in The Color Purple. It was during Tech Week that we had a break, and I wanted to go back to the room. We had been at the theater all day long, so that 2-hour dinner break, I said, I'll walk back to my room. I flipped on the television. It was on PBS. I love
Good man.
documentaries.
All right.
Exactly. I gave that plug. And the Roosevelt's documentary is playing. And just those minutes that I was in the room, the commentator, I believe it was Ken Burns, had mentioned that in 1901, Booker T. Washington dined with President Theodore Roosevelt at the White House. But then it was all the uproar that came after it because a so-called Negro or black man had dinner with a white man. And I just thought that was so, it's all in my show. That's why they have to come to the show. I don't want to give too much away, but I just couldn't believe that that happened in 1901. And at the time, it was still, 2019 or 2018 when I had done The Color Purple at Milwaukee Rep. And when I heard it, I just knew automatically it was like a seed had been planted in me that I needed to bring this work to the stage. And the first interpretation of it was actually called The Dinner, and it was a cast of 6 actors.
Uh-huh.
And I submitted it to the 2019 National Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They asked me would I consider turning it into a one-man show.
Wow.
And I had already done a few other shows. They had one male character, Crowns is one, and I played all the men, and I loved it. So I was able to, I knew that it would be easy. I knew that it wouldn't be a challenge for me. I knew that I could create all of these individual characters.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a show which at that time had 6 characters. The show now has 16 characters.
Yeah, but that was actually 6 actors that played all the other characters.
Okay.
So now, yes, I'm one actor playing 16 characters.
That's
I'm playing all the other
a
characters.
degree of difficulty much greater than even just playing 6, right?
Yes.
So, first of all, what is the range of characters? I mean, you play not just male characters, you play female characters.
Yes.
You play
one of my favorite female characters is Mrs. Ruffner.
Mhm.
And it's funny, her last name is Ruffner, but she was very strict with all of the servants who served her. So Booker T didn't care because he did not like working in the coal mine. So he asked his mother, would she apply for that vacant position? And she hired Booker T for $5 a month. And because she was so strict in the cleaning of her home, he later used those cleaning skills to be accepted into Hampton. He didn't have any money, so Hampton, the head teacher, decided to make him the janitor so that he could get through his education at Hampton Institute.
So some people will know Booker T. Washington for his book Up from Slavery.
Yes.
He also, of course, founded the Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University.
Yes.
But his, legacy is somewhat complicated. Some people, have taken issue, obviously, with him being a little bit more accommodating of Jim Crow laws and perhaps a little bit more willing to take a slow walk on some, civil rights progress. Is that also part of the story that you tell?
It is part of the story. I did base it on his autobiography, Up from Slavery. He didn't really speak much on W.E.B. Du Bois or Madam C.J. Walker. However, I presented this show at seven other theaters across the country, and I usually will do a post-show talk back, and someone in the audience would always ask, oh, why don't you talk about W.E.B. Du Bois and Madam C.J. Walker? So
And of course, they were some of his more vocal critics.
Yes, and so yes, and some people labeled him a sellout, that kind of thing, and I have incorporated into the show now. I don't dwell on it because this show is very inspiring and very uplifting, and it's about enlightenment, and it's about overcoming obstacles, and it's about maintaining and obtaining perseverance. So I tend to dwell on those moments, but I do mention them in the show now.
Mm-hmm. And so we should say this is at Stage Aurora. I mean, it's a Stage Aurora production, but it's actually going to be produced here at WJCT Studios.
Yes, this Sunday.
This Sunday. And
Yes.
so it's a live taping as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, it's being taped here. And I think mostly what I want to get across is that this is not me standing in one spot giving a lecture on Booker T. Washington. This is an artistic journey. There are visual projections. I'm singing, I'm dancing, I'm playing all these different voices to portray these characters. Like you said, there are female characters. I play Booker T at the age of 9 years old, all the way up till, his marriage to 3 different women, some farmers, different senators. Like, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
But I love it because it keeps me on my toes, and it's just me, so I can't blame anything going wrong
Great.
on anyone else, any
Yeah.
other actor.
Well, Daryl Rubenhall, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Break a Leg this
Yes.
Sunday, July 27th. It's at 3 o'clock, and you can get more information at stageaurora.com.
Yes.
All right.
Or .org.
Excuse me,
Yes.
stageaurora.org.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
That's our program. Thanks for listening. If you have questions or comments, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight or find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when local anchor Anthony Austin explains how he's helping a stranger with leukemia. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, The Story of Us and You, steps you into a treasure trove of memories, now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org.